So there's really 6 tools that we're focused on in this entire course, and tonight we're going to spend our time talking about building MVPs, and we'll describe what is an MVP, why it matters, and actually the really important thing is how you understand and quantify kind of what types of MVPs are the best for you. Now, MVP is such a loaded word. Really what it stands for is a minimum viable product. But the reality is that could be a lot of different things. So I'm going to kind of give you a candidate for actually how you can think about what are the types of MVPs that are out there. And we're going to try and actually score them a little bit about where they're most appropriate for you. And then I'm going to take you through about 13 different types of kind of MVP approaches that you might consider for your business. And I'll tell some more stories about some of the ones that I've used, some of the ones that you might use, and some big companies, how they actually use MVPs. And in the next class, we'll actually talk about turning your MVPs into actually a way to build a business on top of it. So we'll use, kind of take MVPs to the next level about what are the things you're learning, how do you actually turn that into a product that you can go forward with. So tonight we're going to talk about a few things here. We're going to start with understanding what is an MVP and what is this word we hear all the time about. And then we're going to dive really into the concept of minimum viable products. We're going to dive into what it means, what they look like, and how you actually use them. And how do you select the right MVP approach for your business? Because not all MVPs are created equal, and not all of them are appropriate for the stage of business you are. So the idea here is not just to say, like, go do an MVP, because that's kind of what everyone says to entrepreneurs, like, yeah, just do an MVP. It doesn't really help you to know kind of what you should actually be thinking about. So we're going to give you some candidates on how you approach that. And then we're going to go through an example bonanza. Like, I went out and spent several hours over the last couple of weeks trying to find all the different really good examples of MVPs. And again, I'll share all these materials with you guys, but there's tons and tons of ways you can approach it, and you'll see what different people are doing, from emails all the way to creating something and actually walking it into someone's house. Like, there's all kinds of different ways to do it. And at the end, we're going to have time for a couple of volunteers to come up here and actually approach their business concept through this MVP process to figure out what might be the best concept for them. To set the stage of where hopefully you are is we're not actually at the point, a lot of people say, like, I've got this idea. The hope of when you're actually building an MVP is you're a little bit further beyond the idea phase. And one of the things we like to be at is a validated concept. So this means that you've actually taken this from kind of inspiration through some light idea validation, understanding the market size, maybe knowing a little bit about how it works, starting to select that idea, and then actually going out and doing customer discovery. So once you've done a little bit of customer discovery, hopefully you'll be at a place where you've settled on this concept. The idea is you've interviewed somewhere between 40 and 60 kind of interviewees so far. Maybe not that many, maybe more, but somewhere in that range you've gotten familiar. And really what you're starting to do is realize, like, there might be something here worth pursuing. Again, you're not going to know if it's it, and at this point you may not necessarily have the final product. Probably don't have the final product. You'll ultimately learn a lot along the way. But you've got some good theories around what you think here and some feedback that it's worth pursuing. So that's kind of the point you are. Now, if you're not at that point, it's totally okay, but I also urge you to not jump and skip customer discovery. Customer discovery is really important, and it's not like just doing a survey will tell you how to build the right MVP. You really do need to talk to people. So I know that some people will say, like, well, just build an MVP and get it out there. I would say from personal experience, having actually done a survey and then almost built a product that when I talked to people, they told me I was wrong, really urge you guys to spend some time talking to customers before you get out there. So this is what we're trying to accomplish here. Is something minimal? Is it viable? And is it a product? That's kind of what we're trying to determine with an MVP. So this quote is a great one from Reid Hoffman, who is actually the founder of LinkedIn, one of the early investors in Facebook. Pretty smart in this stuff. And what he says, if you're not embarrassed by the first product that the first version of your product, then you probably waited too long to ship. And I think that's a great example of what we're doing here today, is the word minimum. We're trying to get something that is the smallest feature set out there that we can learn from. So again, don't try and build something that's awesome. Try and build something that will help you learn something and to make it awesome eventually down the road. So that's the key thing around minimum. So I'm going to give a quick example of a company called The Point, and tell a story of how it was the unlean company and how it took being unlean to become a lean company and ultimately become a huge company these days. So this company was actually set up to do something around helping groups take action together. So it was around, the tagline is easy and effective group action. It took 10 months to develop this platform by a team, a fairly large team. They burned several $1 million in this process, and then once they got the product out there, they saw people were really using it. There was a few people using it, but they didn't have any traction, and definitely not enough traction to build a business that they could stick behind. So then they looked at it and said, well, let's figure out maybe what we need to do. They spent 10 more months. So we're 20 months into this product before they realized the point was not going to work. So they decided maybe we should do something about this. We've sunk 20 months into this thing, this whole group thing. What do we do about it? Well, it turned out that the CEO of this company was Andrew Mason. And this whole group thing had something to it. So they actually said, you know, there's something around making groups make decisions when they're actually trying to buy things to get discounts. So Andrew turned that approach and literally called on the phone with his team of salespeople and even had the engineers on the phone calling for the first Groupon. That was the first MVP that they built. It was built incredibly hacky, as he called it, after spending 20 months building someone else. Groupon is now a $1 billion plus evaluation company, all from something they built with, you know, pencils and a WordPress theme, basically, is what they first built the entire Groupon on. So just as an example of that, spending 20 months of doing something, the understanding that they got about group dynamics was really important, but they ultimately spent 20 months and several $1 million doing the unlean thing to ultimately do the lean thing. So seems like a pretty good example of the thing not to do, but also the lesson of what to do. So the reason that actually doing an MVP matters is because you get to a certain point when you gotta stop talking and you gotta see if people will put up. So this is actually the point where you need to get beyond the point of just what your customers tell you and see where the rubber meets the road. Will they actually buy what you're selling? Will the dog eat the dog food? Will someone give you money for what you're creating? And so this is where the MVP comes in, is we're actually trying to get something that's some level of approximation of product in front of someone to see if they will use it, to see if they will buy it from you, or to see if you're wrong. And those are all important outcomes that you might have here, but that's ultimately the goal here, is we're getting beyond just talking and into actually action. So the other thing that I think is important to know about this process here, and why I think it's important to not necessarily just run blindly after things and throw stuff up against the wall, is this great quote from Jason Fried, who is the founder of the company that created Basecamp, if you've ever heard Basecamp. Build half a product, not a half-assed one. And it's important that ultimately you should scope this to the way that you can learn and not build something that's just half-assed to get it out there. Be thoughtful about it, but at the same point, be very, very narrow. So let's dive into what exactly an MVP is. So the trick here is that you're actually trying to find the smallest feature set that helps you learn something, that helps you learn to get orders, and may help you to actually get feedback, or may help you fail. And you're ultimately going through this process so that you can learn. Now there's kind of a dynamic here where you're actually using customer discovery, talking to people in interviews, and coming up with a hypothesis. From that hypothesis, you're actually putting out to customers for validation. And if you're right, you continue forward. If you're wrong, you pivot and move back through. So this is ultimately what you're trying to do with an MVP, is you're actually trying to figure out what's the smallest feature set that can help you learn whether or not you should go forward with this thing, whether you should learn more, or you should go back and pivot. And that's really the simplest way to describe it. So just one more time, the smallest feature set. That's the whole goal in this thing that will get you something to give you confidence to move forward. Whether that's an order, whether that's someone who's using it, whatever it is. But again, you're trying to get some kind of validation that says, keep going. Now you also might get validation that says, don't go. That doesn't mean that you should necessarily give up and start over. It just means you need to go back and listen again. But that's ultimately what you're doing. So here's some examples of MVPs that people have used, and I've used I've used all of these as some kind of an MVP. And we're going to talk about them in detail, but I just wanted to give an example that MVPs don't necessarily mean having a chief technology officer building something. What it means is actually a feature set or a way that you can get something that approximates the product in front of someone so you can learn. So who here actually is a developer, has actually ever developed something or codes at all? Anyone? A couple? All right, so you guys are an advantage in some ways that you know how to build things. You're also at a disadvantage in that you know how to build things. The reality is that you want to try and build the smallest feature set possible. So the challenge is, if you're an engineer, have an engineering mind, is that you oftentimes think, well, I'll just build it. I know what the customer wants. And so I'd even caution the folks that have any kind of engineering background to not get out GitHub and start pushing code, to actually be thoughtful about what you're going to build. So all of these are examples of what MVPs can be, and you'll see none of them involve writing Ruby on Rails, Python, or any type of coding. It's not what this is. These are all tools that can actually help you test. So I'm going to talk about my own personal story here a little bit, and I like to call this the 90 days of MVPs from my last company. So my last company, called Zarly, is actually a marketplace to find great local service providers, the best baker in town, the best painter, the best house cleaner, all those type of service provider businesses. So when we actually started this company, we didn't really intend to start the company at all. We went to an event called Startup Weekend, which is essentially a 54-hour hackathon where you get developers, designers, and business people together in a room and you see what they can work on over the course of the weekend to demo something on Sunday. So I came in on Friday night with another friend of mine named Bo Fishback, and Bo and I said, we're actually just here to coach other teams. We weren't even going to participate, but Bo decided to ultimately pitch something that we talked about that ultimately became Zarly. So he pitched this idea on Friday night. He literally said, I want to build something that's geo-located eBay. We'll call it GeoBay, which ultimately became Zarly down the road. But we pitched this idea, and ultimately people said they thought it was interesting enough to work on this with us. That is our first MVP. We literally got the idea out there to see if people were interested in it, and they were. That's an MVP. That means we should continue. So if you're taking the testing here, we did customer discovery. We asked, would anyone like to give up their entire weekend and work on a concept around building a geo-focused eBay? Which we were totally wrong in what we were actually doing, but we started the idea, the conversation. So that was first MVP right there, is pitching it out there, and we recruited 10 people to work on that, including a really talented developer named Ian Hunter, who eventually became my co-founder with Bo. So the next day we had this concept, but we were trying to build something that was a way that we could actually let people ask the community to find someone to help them with whatever they're doing, to bring them a cup of coffee, to have someone mow their lawn, to bring them an iPad, whatever it was. So we said, you know, that's kind of an interesting concept. We should test that. So literally, all we used was a Twitter account and a Facebook account. And Bo said, I will pay $50 for someone to get 50 signatures of people at this hackathon here on a t-shirt, and I will pay you $50. All it was tweeted out there, shared amongst the group, and within an hour, someone had said, you know what, I'd love 50 bucks. Literally grabbed a t-shirt and went around and got everyone to sign this t-shirt, and Bo paid him $50. That was our second MVP. Turned out that we could actually ask people to do something for money, and if they were willing to do it, they would actually go and fulfill it. All using social media. So again, we've built nothing so far. We've used Twitter and Facebook as all we've built, and we've literally helped test it. The next day, we actually had final presentations, and so Ian had actually previously built a garage sale finder application. I know it sounds really weird. I'm not really sure who wants to find garage sales, but it turns out maybe there are people. So he built a very simple, hacky version to see if this whole concept would work, where he could actually use an iPhone app and actually request that, and it would send out a message to everyone in the community, as well as through social media, making that same ask. And so Sunday night, we actually pitched this concept in front of people, and people liked it. One of those people who happened to be there was actually Ashton Kutcher, who soon, a couple days later, became our first investor. Well, Ashton actually thought the idea was pretty great, and great enough that 3 days later, he gave us $1 million. Our third MVP. In the course of 3 days, we had 3 MVPs that were all about learning. Now you see, very little coding was done. Ian had repurposed other technology and kind of tweaked it a little bit to get that thing out there. We'd done a first one, which is just asking people, hey, is this idea interesting? The next one was actually using social media. The third one was building something. And then 2 weeks later, we actually built a very simple version that we launched publicly in Austin, Texas for an event called South by Southwest. Just to see if we put this out there in the wild among 50,000 tech enthusiasts, would people use it? Well, they did. And over the course of 24 hours, we saw $10,000 of transactions move through this platform. So we knew we might be onto something there. And again, continued to test using social media to prove this thing. And literally after 90 days out there, we had built a very simple version, a very simple MVP that was out there. And in the first month of having this out nationwide, had $1 million of transactions flow through the platform. A lot of those transactions on the back end of this were run by a team of 25 Filipinos who were actually helping make all the magic happen behind the scenes. Again, that's what an MVP is. All of those things are simple tests along the way. We weren't building the final thing, we were just building steps along the way. So does that make sense in terms of some examples of MVPs? Again, these are not things that were earth-shattering. We did have the benefit of having some developers, but again, you can see we didn't necessarily start out by developing right away. Once we knew we had validation, then we did. So do you have any questions about that so far to start out with? Yes,
Can you
John.
explain the Filipinos?
Yes, I can. So there's actually a great service called Odesk, and what we used is we actually hired people on Odesk to help market matching. So Zarly was actually a marketplace where someone could ask for something. I'm looking for a suitcase, I'm looking for someone to mow my lawn, but we didn't have the sophisticated matching solutions yet. So we actually hired a team of 25 people to go out and scour places like Craigslist, eBay, whatever it might be, to telephone people to actually make the market happen. So that was actually our solution to saying, computers aren't fast enough and we don't have enough time to build something, let's actually just hire humans to actually go out and solve that. So another MVP was saying, can we just get 25 people to actually go out and kind of make the market? Ultimately, again, the goal here with an MVP is building the smallest feature set. And again, hopefully you saw that example of I kind of gave you 5 different small feature sets that got us to the point where we could have 1 million people using the transaction all over 90 days. But there was a number of tests along the way that we learned, and eventually, when we did launch something, it was still incredibly hacky. It wasn't like the final product 90 days in. We weren't building something magical quite yet. We were just trying to build something that could help us learn. And that's the whole goal of building it.